As we began our descent onto Epsilon 12, the icy, desolate landscape came into view beneath us, stretching out like a frozen sea beneath a dull, distant sun. My pulse quickened as we drew closer, the glistening expanse below so vast and lifeless it felt as if we were about to land on the remains of some ancient, forgotten world. My hands clenched around the armrests, and I focused on the cold, sterile hum of the shuttle, trying to steady my breath. The shuttle jolted slightly as we touched down, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Landing sequence complete," Lee announced, his voice almost as tense as I felt. He powered down the engines, and silence filled the cabin, heavy and absolute. I glanced around at my crewmates. Cassie, our geologist, had her eyes fixed on the viewport, her gaze distant, as if already grappling with whatever lay beyond. "We should gear up," I said, the words sounding hollow in the stillness. I unbuckled my harness, doing my best to keep my hands from trembling. One by one, the others followed, moving slowly, deliberately, as if each of us could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. Cassie was the last to stand, her movements hesitant. She scanned the cabin, her expression somewhere between fear and anticipation. "What if," she began, her voice barely more than a whisper, "what if there's nothing out there? What if all we find is ice and emptiness?" Elena, our lead biologist, glanced at her, a slight frown on her face. "We've seen the scans. This isn't just some random rock in space. There's evidence of structures out there. We didn't come all this way for nothing." But even her words sounded unconvincing, and a chill prickled at the back of my neck. Cassie was right. We didn't know what waited for us out there. The research, the satellite images, the scans, everything had pointed to something monumental. And yet, faced with the reality of it, the possibility of disappointment felt almost as daunting as the unknown. Lee's voice cut through the tension, grounding us. "Are we ready to move?" He was already by the hatch, his hand on the control panel, waiting for the signal. I took a steadying breath, giving a slight nod. "Let's do this." But the words felt empty, more like an attempt to convince myself than anything else. The hatch hissed open, and the cold, alien air seeped into the shuttle, biting through our suits despite the insulation. I stepped forward, feeling the crunch of frozen ground beneath my boots. Outside, the barren landscape stretched in every direction, an endless expanse of frost and crystalline formations. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of our suits. I could feel each breath reverberate in my chest, loud against the unyielding stillness of the planet. Cassie joined me, glancing around, her brow furrowed. "It's so empty," she murmured, echoing the thought gnawing at the back of my mind. Elena was close behind, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Look at the formations," she said, pointing toward the jagged, spire-like structures scattered across the landscape. "They're too uniform to be natural. Something made those." I peered at the distant shapes, a mix of awe and unease settling over me. There was something about their symmetry, their stark contrast to the rest of the landscape, that felt deeply wrong, as if they were not of this world, but from something older, something that shouldn't have been disturbed. "Let's gather initial samples," I said, my voice sounding small against the vastness of the alien expanse. I could see Cassie's hands shake slightly as she adjusted her equipment, her eyes darting around as if expecting something to leap from the shadows. Elena glanced at us, her expression serious. "This is history we're walking on," she reminded us, her voice barely more than a murmur. "If we find evidence of life here, even a trace, it could change everything." Cassie nodded, though her face was still etched with worry. "What if they don't believe us?" she asked, her words cutting through the heavy quiet. "What if everything we find here just gets dismissed?" Her question lingered, a fear we'd all tried to push down but couldn't ignore. I felt a chill at her words, the realization sinking in that even if we survived this, even if we made it back, the truth might still be lost, buried under bureaucracy and disbelief. "We'll make them listen," I replied, my tone more resolute than I felt. My heart pounded at the thought of facing those who wouldn't understand what we'd found, who wouldn't grasp the sheer enormity of it. I'd written down every observation, every detail, but there were no words that could capture the weight of this place, the oppressive silence, the feeling that something watched us from the shadows. Lee's voice broke through my thoughts, firm and commanding. "Stay focused. We came here for answers. Let's not lose sight of that." I nodded, forcing myself to push aside the fear, the nagging doubts. Whatever lay ahead, we would document it. We would find a way to make them see. Cassie moved closer to the hatch, casting one last, hesitant glance at the alien landscape beyond. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice barely a whisper. but in a way that makes you wonder if you should even be looking. That's what scares me, I replied, joining her at the edge. My gaze drifted toward the towering structures in the distance. They stood there, cold and unyielding, a reminder that we were intruders in a place that did not welcome us. As we stepped out of the shuttle and onto the icy surface of Epsilon 12, a wave of trepidation washed over me. The ground crunched beneath my boots, the sound amplified in the cold air, creating an almost eerie echo. The landscape stretched out before us, a vast expanse of white and blue, broken only by the jagged formations that loomed like ancient sentinels, casting long, distorted shadows across the ice. I took a deep breath, feeling the chill fill my lungs, the cold sharper than I had anticipated. "Look at that," Cassie said, pointing toward a formation that jutted out at an odd angle, its crystalline surface glistening in the distant light. "It's almost like it was made that way on purpose." "Nature doesn't create such perfect angles," Dr. Oliver remarked, adjusting his glasses, his tone laced with both skepticism and curiosity. "Whatever happened here, it wasn't just erosion." I glanced over at Lee, who was setting up the main equipment, his movements steady despite the tension in the air. "You think we're the first ones to find this place?" I asked, though I already felt the answer in my gut. "No way," he replied, not looking up. "There's history here. This is what we've trained for, right? Let's get some readings." As we gathered our gear, I felt the weight of the mission settling on my shoulders. The silence enveloped us, thick and heavy, pressing down as if the very atmosphere was stifling our voices. Cassie moved closer to me, her eyes wide and searching, a mixture of excitement and dread in her expression. "Do you think we'll find anything significant?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to," I replied, though a knot tightened in my stomach. "This could be the discovery of a lifetime." Elena joined us, her gaze fixed on a distant structure that towered above the others, casting a long shadow. "Whatever it is, it's still standing after all this time. We need to investigate that first." Her determination was palpable, but I sensed an underlying fear that mirrored my own. "Let's document the surroundings first," I suggested, trying to maintain a sense of control. "We should collect samples from various locations before we approach any structures. We don't know what might be inside." "Agreed," Dr. Oliver said, nodding. "Let's split into teams. We can cover more ground that way." We organized ourselves quickly, with Elena and Lee heading toward the towering structure, while Cassie and I moved in the opposite direction, venturing deeper into the frozen landscape. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The shadows seemed to shift and flicker at the edges of my vision, as if the landscape itself was alive and aware of our presence. "Are you okay?" Cassie asked, breaking my concentration. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just a little on edge, I guess." She nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. We continued moving, the vast emptiness surrounding us amplifying the slightest sound, the crunch of our boots against the ice echoing like a distant drumbeat. As we reached a series of smaller formations, I pulled out my scanner, its screen lighting up with readings that flickered erratically. "What the?" I muttered, adjusting the settings, but the readings remained unstable, like static on an old radio. Cassie peered over my shoulder, her brows knitted together. "What does it say?" "Hard to tell. It's like there's interference coming from everywhere." I scanned the area again, my unease growing. It doesn't feel right. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, almost imperceptible at first, but gradually growing louder, reverberating through the ice. I glanced at Cassie, her eyes wide as she looked around, searching for the source. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yeah," I replied, my heart racing. "What is that?" The sound seemed to pulse, resonating through my bones, and for a moment I felt a strange pull, as if the ground beneath us was calling out. I shook my head, trying to clear the sensation. We should keep moving. This place is messing with my head. As we pressed on, the hum intensified, weaving in and out of our thoughts like a melody we couldn't quite grasp. I noticed Cassie had fallen silent, her expression tense as she clutched her scanner tightly. "What's wrong?" I asked, concerned. I don't know. It feels like the sound is trying to tell us something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," I cautioned, trying to ground both of us in reality. "It's just the atmosphere. We're not alone out here, and that can mess with your mind." Just as I spoke, the ground shook slightly, a low tremor rippling through the ice, causing us to stumble. I grabbed onto a formation to steady myself. "Did you feel that?" I shouted, my voice rising above the hum. Cassie nodded, her face pale. "What was that?" "I don't know, but we should head back to the others," I urged. The hum continued to grow louder, echoing in my ears as I turned to lead the way back. But the moment I turned, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the distance, a shadow darting behind one of the larger formations. "What was that?" I breathed, stopping in my tracks. "What?" Cassie asked, looking around. Something just moved," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. Before I could respond, the hum surged again, louder than before, a sudden rush of energy that made the air feel electric. I glanced back at Cassie, who was staring at the formation, her eyes wide with fear. The shadows twisted, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a shape lurking just beyond our view. "Let's go," I said, urgency creeping into my voice. "Now." We began to move quickly, our previous apprehension replaced by the instinctual need to escape whatever presence lurked in the shadows. The hum continued to pulse, filling the air with an ominous warning that reverberated through the ice, urging us to turn back. The icy wind whipped around us as we stepped outside, the stark landscape of Epsilon 12 unfurling like an alien tapestry before our eyes. Crystalline formations towered over us, their jagged edges glistening like teeth against the pale horizon. I felt a mix of awe and unease settle in my stomach, as if the very ground beneath us was a living entity, holding secrets we weren't meant to uncover. "Stay close," I cautioned, glancing at my team. Cassie was adjusting her scanner, her brow furrowed in concentration, while Lee and Dr. Oliver fanned out slightly, each of them engaging with their equipment. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint sounds of our suits and the crunch of frost beneath our boots. It was unsettling, a reminder of how utterly alone we were on this distant world. "Can you feel that?" Cassie said suddenly, her voice low. She glanced around, her eyes darting from one formation to another. "It's like the air is charged." I nodded, feeling it too, the tension that hung in the atmosphere, thick and electric. "It's probably just the equipment," I replied, trying to sound reassuring. "Let's focus on gathering our initial data." We moved toward a cluster of smaller formations, the ice shimmering in the faint light. As we approached, I noticed strange patterns etched into the surface, symbols or markings, perhaps remnants of an alien civilization long gone. I pulled out my recorder, intent on capturing everything for our report. "Look at this," I called, kneeling to examine the markings more closely. They seemed to pulse slightly under my touch, sending a shiver up my spine. Cassie knelt beside me, her expression a mixture of fascination and fear. "Do you think it's a language?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe," I replied, tracing the lines with my finger. "Or it could be some form of communication, a way to convey something significant." I glanced back at the others, who were now gathered around us, their faces illuminated by the glow of their devices. "Whatever it is, we need to document it," Dr. Oliver said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "This could provide invaluable insights into what happened here." Just as I was about to record my observations, the ground trembled beneath us, a low rumble that felt like a warning. I exchanged a worried glance with Cassie, who seemed to freeze in place, her eyes wide with panic. "What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, my heart racing. "Let's back away from the formations." As we took a few cautious steps back, the tremor grew stronger, sending small shards of ice cascading down from the taller formations. It felt as if the planet itself was shifting, awakening from a long slumber, and I couldn't shake the sense that we had crossed some invisible threshold. "Everyone, stay alert," Lee said, his voice steady despite the tension. "We need to keep moving and gather more data before anything else happens." We cautiously resumed our work, but the unease lingered in the air, thick and oppressive. As I scanned the area, I caught sight of movement in the distant shadows flitting between the crystalline structures, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. I blinked, unsure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. "Did you see that?" I whispered, glancing at Cassie, who was also staring in the same direction. She nodded, her face pale. "What was it?" "Whatever it was, it's not friendly," I muttered, feeling a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "We need to stick together." Suddenly, the low hum from before returned, now louder and more insistent, vibrating through the ground and into our bones. It felt like a pulse, a rhythm that matched the racing of my heart. I looked around, half expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Focus on your readings, Lee instructed, but even he sounded uncertain. We're here to gather data, remember? Let's not get distracted by shadows. Just then, a shrill cry pierced the silence, echoing across the icy plains. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard, wild and primal, filled with a deep, unrestrained rage. It sent chills down my spine, and for a moment, all I could do was stand frozen in place. What was that? Cassie gasped, her eyes wide with fear. I have no idea, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. But we need to get back to the shuttle. As I turned to lead the way, the ground shook violently beneath us, and a massive crack erupted in the ice, splitting the surface wide open. I stumbled, trying to regain my balance, and saw that the fissure extended toward the towering formations, splitting the landscape like a gaping wound. Run, Lee shouted, urgency igniting in his voice. We sprinted back toward the shuttle, the sound of the crack echoing behind us like thunder. The hum intensified, merging with the sound of our pounding footsteps. I glanced back, heart racing, only to see shadows coalescing at the edge of the fissure, twisting and writhing as though they were alive. Keep moving, I yelled, adrenaline surging through me. We rounded the last formation, the shuttle coming into view, but the ground continued to tremble, and I felt the ice shift beneath my feet. Cassie stumbled, but I grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. Don't look back, I urged, my voice hoarse with fear. Finally, we reached the shuttle, the familiar hum of its engines grounding us amidst the chaos. Lee was already at the hatch, frantically inputting commands to secure the door. I turned to see the shadows advancing, an ethereal wave creeping closer, and my breath caught in my throat. Get in, Lee shouted, his voice urgent as the hatch hissed open. We scrambled inside, our hearts racing as the door sealed shut behind us. The hum from outside faded, but the sense of dread remained, wrapping around us like a cold blanket. I looked around at my team, their faces pale and shaken, and I realized we had barely escaped whatever was lurking in the darkness. What the hell was that? Cassie gasped, her breath coming in quick bursts. I don't know, I admitted, my mind racing, but we need to figure it out fast. As we huddled in the shuttle, the oppressive silence of Epsilon 12 loomed around us, wrapping its icy tendrils around our thoughts. I could feel the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, a stark contrast to the stillness outside. The recent tremors and the dark shadows that seemed to pulse beyond the frozen landscape played on my mind, creating a dissonance that made it hard to focus. We need to regroup, Lee said, glancing at the readings on his console. I don't like the idea of staying out there longer than necessary. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension etched across his face. It mirrored my own anxiety. I agree, Dr. Oliver replied, nervously adjusting his glasses. We need to analyze our data, understand what we just experienced. He sounded more shaken than he let on, his hands trembling slightly as he reviewed the readings from our equipment. Cassie turned to me, her expression a mix of determination and fear. What if that thing comes back? What if it wasn't just a trick of the light? We need to understand what we're dealing with before we venture out again. I nodded, but deep down, a part of me was still shaken by what we had witnessed. The hum, the dark shape, and the eerie cry echoed in my mind, blending into a haunting symphony that sent chills down my spine. We have to stay focused, I said, forcing myself to meet her gaze. Let's analyze what we collected. Maybe the data will give us insight into what we're up against. We spread out across the shuttle, each of us diving into our respective tasks. I powered up the scanner, scrolling through the readings we had taken during our brief exploration. The data flowed across the screen, but much of it remained cryptic, like fragments of a forgotten language. It was frustrating, and I could feel the weight of my anxiety pressing down harder. Hey, look at this, Cassie called out, her voice slicing through the quiet. I turned to see her staring at her monitor, her eyes wide with excitement and fear. The readings we took near that large formation, there's something off about the electromagnetic field. Off how? I asked, moving closer to see what she was seeing. It's fluctuating. It's like there's something alive under the surface. And these markings, she pointed to a section of her screen displaying the symbols we had found. They match up with the disturbances. It's almost as if they're connected. I felt a knot form in my stomach. So, you're saying that whatever that thing is, it's somehow tied to the landscape? That we're not just dealing with ancient ruins, but something active? Cassie nodded, her expression serious. Exactly. It's almost like it's reacting to our presence. Before I could respond, Lee interrupted, urgency in his voice. We need to figure out what we're facing. If that thing comes back, it will, Dr. Oliver interjected, his tone grave. If it perceives us as a threat, it may come after us again. We need to prepare. What do you suggest? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rising panic in my chest. I think we should modify our gear, Lee proposed, his eyes narrowing in thought. We could enhance our sensors to pick up any changes in the electromagnetic field and possibly track any movement in the area. If we know where it is, we might stand a chance. That sounds like a solid plan, I agreed, feeling a flicker of hope. If we can detect it before it gets too close, we can avoid another confrontation. We set to work quickly, modifying our equipment with an urgency born of fear. As we worked, I stole glances out the small viewport, my heart racing at every flicker of movement in the shadows. The landscape was hauntingly beautiful, but its beauty held a darkness that I couldn't shake. I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lay hidden beneath the ice, waiting for us to uncover them. Do you think we're the first to come here? Cassie asked suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. I hesitated, the weight of her question heavy in the air. I don't know, I replied slowly. But if we are, then we need to tread carefully. We have no idea what this place has been through. As we finished modifying our gear, I felt a growing sense of dread settle in my stomach. We had come to make history, but I had a terrible feeling that we might become part of a much darker narrative, one written in the cold silence of Epsilon 12. Once our preparations were complete, we gathered near the hatch, our breath visible in the chill air, each exhale a reminder of the stakes we faced. Lee looked at us, his expression serious. Remember, stay close and keep your equipment active. If anything feels off, we retreat. No exceptions. I nodded, feeling the weight of our mission bearing down on me. Let's move out. We stepped outside once more, the cold biting at our exposed skin. The hum that had filled the shuttle was replaced by an unsettling silence, a void that seemed to stretch infinitely. It was as if the planet was holding its breath, waiting for our next move. As we ventured deeper into the landscape, I felt the tension in the air thicken, an invisible force pressing against us. The towering formations surrounded us, their shadows long and distorted. I could sense the eyes of the ancient world upon us, and the fear of what lay ahead clawed at my thoughts. What if it's waiting for us? Cassie said, her voice barely a whisper. It might be, I admitted, forcing myself to take a steadying breath, but we won't find answers hiding in here. We have to confront it. As we moved cautiously forward, the shadows seemed to deepen, and I realized that the true horror of Epsilon 12 was not just in what lay ahead, but in the dark uncertainty that surrounded us. The moment we stepped back into the vast expanse of Epsilon 12, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The icy wind howled, carrying with it a haunting echo that seemed to resonate from the distant formations. I looked at my team, their faces tense with determination and unspoken fear, and I knew we had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back now. We had to confront whatever lay hidden within this frozen world. Let's head toward the readings, Lee suggested, his voice steady despite the tremor in the air. The anomalous electromagnetic signatures are strongest near those large structures. I nodded, leading the way as we navigated the treacherous ice. My heart raced with each step, the cold seeping into my bones as the shadows of the crystalline formations loomed around us. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the crunch of our boots against the frost. It felt as if we were walking deeper into a tomb, the weight of history pressing down on us. As we approached the nearest formation, I pulled out my scanner, watching the readings fluctuate wildly on the screen. The energy here is intense, I said, my voice a mix of excitement and dread. Whatever is under the surface, it's alive. Alive? Cassie echoed, her brow furrowed in concern. What do you mean? I mean, it's not just residual energy from something that once existed. It's reacting to us, I explained, feeling the tension rise in the group. We need to be cautious. Dr. Oliver stepped closer to the formation, his eyes scanning the markings etched into the ice. These symbols, they could represent a form of communication, he mused, his voice barely above a whisper. If they are indeed alive, then perhaps they are trying to reach out. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Or warn us, I replied, my eyes drifting to the shadows that danced at the edges of our vision. We're not just dealing with ancient ruins. We may be in the presence of something that doesn't want us here. As I spoke, a low rumble echoed through the air, the ground trembling slightly beneath our feet. My heart raced as I looked at the others, their expressions shifting from determination to fear. What was that? Cassie asked, her voice trembling. Stay alert, Lee said, his tone sharper now. It could be nothing, but we need to keep moving. We pressed on, navigating the labyrinth of ice and crystal, the rumbling growing louder as we drew closer to the towering structure that dominated the landscape. With each step, the sense of dread intensified, weighing heavily on my chest. I don't like this, Cassie whispered, glancing back at the path we had taken. It feels like we're being drawn into a trap. Keep your eyes on the prize, I said, trying to sound confident. We'll document everything we find. We just need to stay together. As we reached the base of the towering structure, the ground shook again, this time more violently, sending vibrations through the ice. I stumbled, barely catching myself against the frozen wall. What is happening? I shouted, my voice cutting through the chaos. Look! Dr. Oliver pointed toward the top of the structure. Dark shapes were beginning to coalesce, moving along the crystalline surfaces as if something was awakening. The shadows twisted and turned, forming into distinct figures that flickered in and out of view. The air thickened, and the low hum transformed into a haunting chorus of whispers, echoing around us, overlapping and blending into an unsettling symphony. It was a language I couldn't comprehend, yet it felt as though it resonated within me, tugging at the corners of my mind. Get back, Lee shouted, his voice a mixture of fear and authority. We stepped back, eyes wide, as the figures began to descend from the structure, gliding effortlessly through the air, surrounded by an otherworldly glow. What do we do? Cassie's voice was strained, her eyes darting from one shadow to another. Stay together, I urged, feeling a cold sweat break out across my forehead. Don't let them separate us. But as the figures drew closer, I could see their forms more clearly elongated and distorted, with features that shifted and twisted unnaturally. They moved with an elegance that belied the horror of their appearance, and I could feel their presence pressing in on us, probing our thoughts and fears. Do you understand? One of the figures seemed to whisper, its voice a dissonant echo that filled the air. The word resonated within me, like a haunting melody. I felt my resolve weaken, the urge to flee battling against an inexplicable desire to understand. Whatever this is, we're not here to harm you, I shouted, my voice breaking through the haze. We come in peace. The figures paused, their shadows flickering as if considering my words. The hum intensified, vibrating through the ground beneath us, and I sensed a moment of stillness, a fragile truce between us and whatever ancient force had awakened. Leave, the whisper echoed, carrying an unmistakable urgency. Leave this place while you still can. Fear gripped me, and I turned to my team. We need to go, now. The figures surged forward, their forms merging into a whirlwind of shadows, and in that moment, instinct took over. We turned and ran, scrambling back toward the shuttle, the whispers trailing behind us like a haunting lullaby, urging us to heed their warning. Run, Lee shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. The ground shook again, this time more violently, cracking beneath our feet as we sprinted. We could feel the presence behind us, the weight of something ancient and powerful, urging us to flee. We reached the shuttle, breathless and terrified, slamming the door shut behind us. I leaned against the cold metal, my heart racing as I looked at my team, their faces pale and drawn. What just happened? Cassie gasped, her voice trembling. I don't know, I admitted, trying to steady my breathing. But whatever it was, it wanted us to leave. We need to regroup and analyze what we found. We may have narrowly escaped something we don't fully understand. As we sat in the relative safety of the shuttle, the weight of our experience settled over us like a dark cloud. We were alive, but the shadows of Epsilon 12 were still very much present, lurking just beyond our reach, waiting for the next opportunity to ensnare us in their ancient grasp. The shuttle's interior felt like a fragile cocoon, the weight of the alien world pressing against its walls as we huddled together, hearts racing from the encounter with the shadowy figures. The echoes of their warning still reverberated in my mind, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked outside. We had narrowly escaped something ancient and malevolent, but I knew that this was only the beginning of our troubles. Are we safe in here? Cassie asked, her voice trembling as she peered out of the small viewport. I could see the fear in her eyes, the way she instinctively recoiled from the icy landscape beyond. For now, yes, I replied, though I couldn't help but feel the same doubts clawing at my insides. But we need to figure out what we just encountered. That wasn't just a random occurrence. Lee busied himself with the control panel, fingers flying over the buttons as he began to pull up the data from our scans. The readings were off the charts, he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. Whatever that was, it was more than just a shadow. It felt sentient. Dr. Oliver nodded, adjusting his glasses nervously as he joined Lee at the panel. If it was able to manipulate the electromagnetic fields around it, then it likely possesses some form of intelligence. We need to understand how it operates if we're going to survive this. I crossed my arms, feeling a chill seep deeper into my bones. But how do we do that? We barely escaped. What if it comes back? We prepare, Lee said firmly, his eyes narrowing with determination. We need to gather more data while we still can. We can't let fear dictate our actions. If that entity is tied to this place, then understanding it could be the key to our survival. What if it's a trap? Cassie interjected, her voice rising slightly. What if it's waiting for us to go back out there? We could be walking straight into its grasp. I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me, but I pushed it aside. We can't live in fear. We have a mission, and if we abandon it now, we may never understand what we've encountered. We owe it to ourselves and to anyone else who might come here in the future. Dr. Oliver took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm himself. Let's review what we know. The symbols, the electromagnetic anomalies, and the shadows. If we can piece this together, we might uncover what this place truly is. Lee nodded, pulling up the readings on the display. We should head back to the site of the formation. We need to capture a clearer picture of the energy fluctuations. Cassie looked between us, uncertainty etched on her face. And what if we encounter it again? What if it's waiting for us? I don't think I can handle that. We won't be alone, I assured her, my voice steady. We're stronger together. We'll keep each other safe. After a moment's hesitation, Cassie nodded, though I could still see the flicker of fear in her eyes. Okay, let's do this. We gathered our gear again, the air thick with tension as we prepared to step back into the cold. I felt a surge of determination as I strapped on my equipment, each click of the harness a reminder of my resolve. Whatever lay beyond the shuttle doors, we would face it together. The hatch just opened, and the icy air rushed in, a stark contrast to the warmth of the shuttle. We stepped out, the vast landscape stretching before us, eerily silent once more. I glanced at my team, each of us scanning the area for any signs of movement. The shadows were no longer distant. They were closer now, waiting just beyond our sight. Stay close, I whispered, my voice firm, and keep your eyes open. We made our way back to the site of the crystalline formation, the energy readings guiding us like a beacon. The landscape felt different this time, charged with an electricity that prickled against my skin. Every crack and crevice seemed to hold secrets, and I could feel the shadows watching us, lurking just outside the reach of our senses. As we approached the formation, the air became thick with tension. The symbols we had seen before pulsed faintly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow alive, reacting to our presence. The ground rumbled softly, and I paused, glancing at the others. Did you feel that? I asked, my heart racing. Yeah, Lee replied, his gaze locked on the formation. It's like it knows we're here. I pulled out my scanner, eager to capture the data. The readings fluctuated wildly, the device beeping insistently. It's definitely reacting. We need to record as much as we can. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught my eye. Shadows darted between the crystalline structures, flickering at the edges of my vision. I felt a surge of panic as I turned, heart pounding. There, did you see that? I did, Cassie whispered, her voice barely audible. What is it? It's not just a figment of our imagination, Dr. Oliver said, his voice steady. Whatever we encountered earlier, it's still here. We're not alone. The shadows shifted again, swirling and coalescing into shapes that felt almost familiar yet distinctly wrong. I could hear the whispers once more, a haunting echo that danced just beyond comprehension. It was a language I couldn't grasp, yet it felt like it resonated deep within me, tugging at my very soul. Stay close, I urged, gripping my scanner tightly as we edged closer to the formation. The air was electric, and the shadows began to encroach, swirling around us like a living fog. Prepare yourselves, Lee shouted, pulling out his equipment, ready to defend us if necessary. But as we stood there, the shadows pulsed, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw faces anguished, pleading, lost. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't just a warning, it was a call. Whatever had been trapped here had wanted us to understand. Before I could voice my thoughts, the ground shook violently, and the shadows surged forward. The whispers grew into a cacophony, drowning out our thoughts as I felt the very fabric of reality shift around us. The danger was real, and we were caught in its grasp. As the shadows closed in around us, I felt a chill of primal fear grip my heart. The whispers grew louder, swirling in a chaotic rhythm that echoed in my ears, almost drowning out the sound of my own racing heartbeat. The darkness seemed to pulse, drawing closer as the shapes took form, twisting and contorting into something both fascinating and terrifying. "Stay together," I shouted, forcing my feet to move despite the instinct to flee. We had come too far to turn back now. Whatever was happening, whatever these entities were, we needed to confront them head-on. Lee stood firm beside me, his equipment clutched tightly in his hands, ready to document every detail. "We need to figure out what it wants," he said, his voice steady even as uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Do you think it understands us?" Cassie whispered, her gaze locked onto the swirling shadows that danced before us. "What if it's trying to communicate?" "I don't know, but we have to try," I replied, feeling a strange mixture of dread and resolve. "Let's approach slowly. We can't act like threats." As we moved forward, I could feel the energy in the air shifting, thickening around us like a fog. The figures swirled closer, their forms flickering in and out of focus. It was difficult to discern what they looked like. One moment they appeared almost human, and the next they morphed into grotesque shapes that made my skin crawl. "Don't break formation," Dr. Oliver warned, his voice low but firm. "We need to remain united, no matter what happens." We advanced cautiously, and the whispers began to coalesce into a single word that echoed in my mind: join. It resonated with an urgency that felt both inviting and threatening. I could see Cassie's expression shift from fear to intrigue as she stepped closer to the flickering shapes. "What if they want us to become part of whatever they are?" she asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and horror. "Or to be trapped like them," I countered, my pulse quickening. "We can't let our curiosity blind us. We need to maintain our autonomy." Suddenly, one of the figures reached out, its form stretching and shifting as it moved closer to Cassie. I felt a surge of panic. "Cassie, step back," I shouted, instinctively putting myself between her and the entity. But it didn't strike. Instead, it hovered, its shadowy tendrils swirling as if trying to assess her. The atmosphere crackled with tension, and I could feel the weight of its gaze upon us. "What do you want?" I called out, my voice breaking the heavy silence that followed. "We mean you no harm." The whispers intensified, and the shapes began to coalesce into a more defined figure, its features sharp and angular, almost beautiful in its alien design. It seemed to respond to my question, the movements of its shadowy body mimicking an intricate dance, twisting and weaving as if trying to convey a message. I could feel my heart racing, a mix of fear and fascination taking hold. "We need to understand," I repeated, taking a step forward despite my trepidation. "Please, show us." As I spoke, the figure pulsated, the whispers shifting into a clearer form, resonating with something deep within me. I felt a connection, a strange bond forming between us, a shared longing for knowledge, for understanding. Asterisk, join us, the word echoed through my mind, not as a threat, but an invitation. My thoughts swirled, and I felt the barriers of my consciousness begin to dissolve, blurring the lines between self and the collective. "No, fight it," Cassie shouted, breaking the spell that had begun to wrap around me. I shook my head, trying to regain my senses as the figure drew closer. "Don't," I yelled, but it was too late. The shadows began to encroach, pulling me toward them with a force I couldn't resist. I felt a cold grip on my mind, and the whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of voices that begged for unity, for completion. Asterisk, join us, become one. I fought against the rising tide of darkness, clinging to my individuality, to my team. "We are not part of you," I cried out, struggling to break free from the overwhelming sensation. Suddenly, Lee lunged forward, grabbing my arm and pulling me back with all his strength. "Don't let it take you," he shouted, his eyes wide with fear. His voice broke through the fog of whispers, grounding me in the reality of our situation. I turned to him, feeling the connection to the shadows weaken, the pressure on my mind lifting slightly. As the figures recoiled, the shadows seemed to ripple and pulse with anger. The cacophony of voices rose to a fever pitch, vibrating through the air like an earthquake. "Retreat," Dr. Oliver shouted, pulling Cassie with him as we stumbled back toward the formation. We turned and ran, the shadows swirling around us, reaching out like tendrils trying to drag us into the depths of their darkness. "Go, go, go," I shouted, adrenaline coursing through my veins. We sprinted back toward the shuttle, the icy ground trembling beneath us. I could feel the cold grip of fear tightening around my heart. and I urged my legs to move faster. As we neared the shuttle, I risked a glance back. The shadows had halted, swirling and twisting in place, watching us with a malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. I could still hear the whispers echoing in my mind, urging me to return, to join them. With a final push, we reached the shuttle and scrambled inside. Slamming the door shut behind us, I leaned against the cold metal, gasping for breath, my heart racing as I looked at my team. "What just happened?" Cassie gasped, her face pale and drawn. "I don't know," I admitted, shaking. "But we were almost lost to it. We can't go back out there without a plan. Whatever those entities are, they are powerful, and they're not finished with us yet." As we sat there, the hum of the shuttle and the pulsing energy from outside began to fade. But the weight of what had transpired pressed down on us. We were alive, but we were now entangled in a mystery far deeper than we had ever anticipated. And I could sense that the real horror was only just beginning. The shuttle's interior buzzed with a tense energy as we huddled around the control panel, the weight of our recent encounter heavy on our shoulders. Each of us seemed lost in thought, the silence stretching on, thick and suffocating. I could still hear the whispers echoing in my mind, the invitation to join something vast and unknowable. "What's our next move?" Lee finally asked, breaking the stillness. His eyes were dark with worry, the shadows of the alien landscape reflected in his expression. "We can't just sit here forever." I glanced at Cassie, whose face was pale and drawn. "We need to gather more data and understand what we're dealing with. If that entity is linked to the electromagnetic anomalies we detected, then we have to study them further. But we have to be prepared for anything." Dr. Oliver nodded slowly, his gaze focused. "We might need to devise a way to protect ourselves if we encounter it again. We can't afford to be caught off guard." "Maybe we can create a barrier," Lee suggested, his fingers tapping on the console. "Something to disrupt its influence. We need to use everything at our disposal." As I thought about his words, an idea began to form. What if we could create a pulse? We might be able to temporarily disrupt the electromagnetic field and create a safe zone. It could give us enough time to gather data without the entity encroaching on us. "Sounds risky," Cassie interjected, her voice wavering. "What if it reacts aggressively?" "Then we'll deal with it," I replied, steeling myself. "But we can't let fear dictate our actions. We need answers. We're explorers, and this is our mission." Lee glanced at the readings on his screen, a determined look crossing his face. "Let's set it up. I'll adjust the equipment to send out a pulse. It should be enough to disrupt the area around us." We quickly set to work, each of us focused on our tasks, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The hum of machinery filled the cabin as we assembled the makeshift pulse generator, working together in a flurry of activity. With every connection, the urgency of our situation pressed down on us, reminding us of the looming presence outside. Once the generator was ready, I took a deep breath, my heart racing. "All right, let's do this. Lee, you'll initiate the pulse, and we'll monitor the readings closely. Cassie, keep an eye out for any signs of movement. Dr. Oliver, assist Lee with the calculations." "Got it," they replied, a sense of determination igniting in their voices. "On my mark," I said, my fingers hovering over the activation switch. The tension in the air was almost palpable, thickening with each passing second. 3, 2, 1, now." Lee pressed the button, and the generator hummed to life, a low vibration coursing through the shuttle. I watched as the readings on the screen began to fluctuate, lines dancing wildly as the pulse expanded outward. For a moment, it felt like the world outside held its breath. Then, without warning, the shadows began to writhe and shift, swirling violently at the edges of our vision. The hum outside grew louder, transforming into a chaotic chorus of whispers, each voice layered over the other, echoing a sound that resonated deep within me. "Asterisk, asterisk, join us." "Here it comes," Cassie shouted, her voice filled with panic. I turned just in time to see the shadows surge toward us, the figures materializing in the light of the pulse. "Hold your ground," I yelled, but deep down, I felt a rush of fear. The shadows were not deterred. If anything, they seemed enraged, coiling and twisting like angry serpents. The air thickened as they closed in, and I felt the cold seep into my bones, dragging at my resolve. The whispers became a cacophony, each voice piercing through my thoughts, urging me to surrender. "Asterisk, asterisk, join us," they cried again, louder this time, a singular demand that reverberated through the shuttle. "Adjust the pulse," Lee shouted, frantically tapping at the controls. "We need to increase the output." I'm trying, I replied, my fingers fumbling as the shadows loomed closer. The whispers were relentless, filling my mind with images of darkness and despair, visions of merging with the entity, losing my identity in the process. Stay strong, Dr. Oliver shouted, his voice a beacon amidst the chaos. We can't give in. With a surge of determination, I focused on the console, my heart racing as I adjusted the settings. The readings danced wildly, but I pushed through the fear. On my count, 1, 2, 3. I hit the activation switch again, and the pulse surged outward, flooding the area with a blinding light. For a moment, the shadows hesitated, recoiling as the light pushed back against the darkness. Keep it going, Cassie urged, her eyes wide with fear and hope. We can't let them break through. The whispers faltered, and for a brief moment, I felt a sense of clarity, as if the entity's hold on me was slipping. I gritted my teeth, forcing every ounce of willpower into the pulse. The light intensified, and the shadows writhed, flickering like a flame in the wind. Suddenly, the ground shook again, a violent tremor that threatened to throw us off balance. The shadows surged forward, breaking through the barrier as the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. Now, I shouted, heart pounding as the light enveloped us. We need to go. With a final push, I cut the pulse and grabbed Cassie's arm. Lee and Dr. Oliver were already moving toward the hatch, urgency igniting our actions. We sprinted toward the shuttle, the shadows clawing at our heels, the whispers fading but not entirely gone. As we reached the hatch, I turned back for one last glance. The figures halted, swirling in the light, their shapes losing form. For a moment, it felt like time froze, a final glimpse of the darkness that had beckoned us. And then we were inside, the hatch sealing shut behind us. I leaned against the cold metal, gasping for breath as I looked at my team, the weight of our shared experience pressing down on us. We need to analyze the data and figure out what just happened, I said, trying to steady my racing heart. This isn't over. The shadows outside seemed to linger, waiting for the next opportunity to ensnare us, and I could feel the echoes of their whispers in the back of my mind, a reminder of the darkness that still awaited. The air inside the shuttle was thick with tension as we gathered ourselves after the harrowing encounter. I could still feel the echoes of the whispers lingering in my mind, the invitation to join something vast and unknowable. It was both terrifying and oddly alluring, but I knew we had to push those thoughts aside. Our focus needed to be on survival and understanding the entity that had reached for us. Let's analyze the data we collected, I said, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over us. I turned to Lee, who was already poring over the readings from our makeshift pulse generator. What do you have? Lee glanced up, his face a mask of concentration. The electromagnetic readings spiked when we activated the pulse. There's a clear correlation between the fluctuations and the appearance of those entities. It's almost as if they were drawn to the energy we emitted. Or they were warning us to stay away, Cassie added, her voice trembling slightly. This place, it feels like a trap. Dr. Oliver adjusted his glasses, his brow furrowed. If we're to understand what we're dealing with, we need to revisit the site of that formation. We need more information about those symbols and how they relate to the energy fluctuations. I hesitated, a knot tightening in my stomach at the thought of returning to the shadows. But what if they come after us again? What if we can't escape next time? We can't let fear dictate our actions, Lee said, his voice firm. We need to be proactive. We need to gather as much data as possible before we report back. I nodded slowly, trying to quell the rising tide of anxiety within me. Fine, but we approach with caution. This time, we're prepared. After a few moments, we donned our gear, the weight of our equipment grounding us in the reality of our mission. The hatch hissed open, revealing the alien landscape once more, bathed in an eerie twilight that seemed to stretch on forever. The shadows cast by the crystalline structures looked longer, darker, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting for us. We stepped out into the cold, the ground crunching beneath our boots as we made our way back to the formation. Each step felt heavier, laden with the weight of our previous encounter. The air was charged, crackling with an energy that set my nerves on edge. Stay close, I whispered, feeling the familiar pull of anxiety tightening in my chest. The symbols were just ahead, and with each step, I could feel the shadows shifting, coiling around us like a living entity. As we reached the base of the towering formation, I felt the air change, thickening with an almost palpable pressure. The symbols etched into the ice pulsed faintly, as if they were alive, reacting to our presence. Look at the way they move, Cassie said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's almost hypnotic. Don't get too close, I warned, my instincts screaming at me. We don't know what they're capable of. Dr. Oliver stepped forward, a mix of curiosity and caution in his demeanor. If these symbols are a form of communication, we may be able to decipher their meaning. There must be a pattern we can recognize. As he knelt to examine the markings, I kept my eyes on the shadows that swirled at the edges of our vision. They felt closer now, more present, and the whispers echoed in the back of my mind, urging me to join the darkness. I shook my head, trying to clear the intrusive thoughts. "Look at this," Dr. Oliver exclaimed, pointing at a cluster of symbols. "These seem to repeat. If we can decode them, we might understand what they're trying to convey." I moved closer, peering over his shoulder. "What does it say?" "I'm not sure yet," he said, frowning in concentration. "But it could be a warning, or perhaps an invitation." Before I could respond, the ground trembled again, and a deep rumble echoed through the formation. The symbols began to glow ominously, illuminating the area around us in a sickly light. "Get back," I shouted, instinctively pulling Cassie away from the formation. The shadows writhed and twisted, rushing toward us like a wave of darkness, the whispers escalating into a frantic chorus. "Activate the pulse generator," Lee yelled, scrambling to reach the device. I fumbled for the activation switch, my hands shaking as I fought against the encroaching darkness. The shadows surged, coiling around us like tendrils, pressing closer, their whispers now a deafening roar. "Now," I shouted, and Lee hit the switch. The pulse erupted from the generator, flooding the area with blinding light. The shadows recoiled, writhing and twisting as the energy surged outward, pushing back against the darkness. The whispers began to fade, replaced by a low, resonating hum that vibrated through the ground. I could feel the pressure easing slightly, but I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. "Keep it steady," Cassie urged, her eyes wide with fear. "We can't let them break through again." The light held the shadows at bay, but I could sense their frustration, their anger building. The figures began to pulse, shifting and merging, and for a moment, I thought I saw familiar faces within the dark form's lost souls begging for release. "Hold on," Lee shouted, struggling to maintain the power output. The shadows pushed harder, the whispers rising once more, frantic and pleading. "They're trying to overwhelm the pulse." "Fight it," Dr. Oliver called out, his voice strained. "We can't let them take us." I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to focus. "We need to keep the pulse steady just a little longer." The shadows swirled closer, their forms distorting and shifting, and I could feel my resolve wavering. Join us, the whispers echoed, a siren song that tugged at the corners of my mind. "Don't listen," I shouted, but the words felt weak against the relentless tide. "We are not yours." As the pulse began to flicker, the shadows surged forward, and I realized we were running out of time. With a final push, I activated the emergency override on the generator, sending one last surge of energy into the surrounding area. The light erupted in a brilliant flash, and for a moment, the darkness was pushed back completely, revealing the crystalline structures in stark clarity. The figures twisted and shrieked, but the pulse was relentless, pushing them away. "Now, retreat," I shouted, grabbing Cassie's hand and pulling her back toward the shuttle as Lee and Dr. Oliver followed closely behind. We ran, the shadows fading in the blinding light, but I could still hear the whispers trailing behind us. Asterisk, join us." We reached the shuttle, gasping for breath as I slammed the hatch shut behind us, locking out the darkness. The air inside felt heavy with the weight of our encounter, and as we stood there, hearts racing, I knew this was far from over. "Are we safe?" Cassie asked, her voice trembling as she leaned against the wall for support. "For now," I replied, my heart still pounding. "But we have to understand what we just faced. We can't let this go. There's a reason those entities exist, and we need to uncover the truth before they come for us again." As we settled in, I could still feel the shadows lurking just beyond the shuttle's walls, waiting for the moment when we would dare to venture outside once more. The true horror of Epsilon 12 loomed ahead, a dark promise that we would soon have to confront. The moments after we locked the hatch felt like a fragile reprieve, but deep down, I knew we were merely delaying the inevitable. Shadows loomed outside, their whispers echoing in my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness we had encountered. As we sat in the shuttle, the flickering lights above cast uneasy shadows on our faces, highlighting the tension that had taken root among us. "We need to come up with a plan," I said, breaking the silence that had settled over us like a thick fog. "Gonna get through this. We need to understand what we're up against." Lee nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. We can start by analyzing the data from the pulse generator. There has to be a pattern or some kind of clue that will help us make sense of the entities. Cassie's hands trembled slightly as she worked to bring the data up on her screen. I don't know if I can handle another encounter like that. It felt so powerful, so alive. It wanted something from us. We have to find out what that something is, I replied firmly, forcing down my own fear. Understanding it is the key to our survival. Dr. Oliver sat back, adjusting his glasses again. From what we've seen, those symbols seem to be a form of communication. If we can decipher them, it might give us insight into the intentions of those entities. As Cassie pulled up the readings, I leaned over her shoulder, trying to focus on the screen. The data was a chaotic jumble of numbers and symbols, but beneath the surface, I sensed a rhythm, a hidden structure that could reveal the truth. Look at this, she said, highlighting a series of symbols that appeared to repeat across different readings. These lines, they seem to correlate with the fluctuations in the electromagnetic field. Can you isolate them? I asked, my heart racing at the prospect of finally making sense of the chaos. I'll try, Cassie replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. As she worked, the shadows outside continued their dance, a flickering reminder of what lurked just beyond the shuttle's walls. The screen shifted, and a clear pattern emerged. Here, Cassie exclaimed, her eyes wide with excitement. This sequence appears every time we activated the pulse. It's like a response. Dr. Oliver leaned in, scrutinizing the symbols. If this is indeed a language, then we may be able to translate it. But we need more context. Let's cross-reference with any available data from previous missions, Lee suggested, his expression serious. Maybe there's something in the archives that can help us understand the significance of these symbols. Good idea, I replied, feeling a sense of urgency. Let's compile everything we have and see if we can make connections. As we worked, a strange energy filled the air, a mix of fear and anticipation. With each passing second, I felt the weight of the shadows outside pressing closer, as if they were aware of our efforts and were waiting for us to falter. Minutes turned into hours as we pored over the data, piecing together fragments of information. The atmosphere inside the shuttle grew thicker, the air almost electric, heightening our senses. I could feel the entity's presence beyond the metal walls, a persistent reminder of the danger lurking just out of sight. Then, as if sensing our focus, the shuttle shook violently and alarms blared, jolting us from our concentration. Status report, I shouted, my heart racing. Lee quickly turned to the control panel, eyes wide. The external readings are spiking. The electromagnetic field is fluctuating rapidly. Something is approaching. Can we see what it is? Cassie asked, her voice laced with fear. Trying to access the external cameras, Lee replied, his fingers flying across the controls. The screen flickered to life, showing the landscape outside, dark and foreboding. Then I saw its shadows swirling around the shuttle, gathering at the edges, coalescing into a recognizable form. They're back, I said, dread pooling in my stomach. What do we do? Cassie's voice quivered, her eyes wide with panic. Prepare the pulse generator, I shouted, adrenaline surging through me. We can't let them breach the shuttle again. Lee hurried to the generator, frantically adjusting the settings while I scanned the outside with rising anxiety. The shadows pressed closer, their whispers a haunting melody that filled my mind. Asterisk, asterisk, join us, join us. Focus, I yelled, trying to drown out the voices. We have to remain united. As the shadows pulsed with energy, Lee initiated the generator, and a bright light erupted, pushing against the encroaching darkness. The whispers intensified, blending into a chaotic roar that threatened to overwhelm us. Hold your ground, I urged, feeling the pressure build as the light pushed back against the shadows. We won't be taken this time. The shadow surged, but the pulse held firm, creating a barrier between us and the darkness. I could see the figures twisting and writhing, their forms flickering as if caught in a storm. We can do this, Dr. Oliver shouted, his voice steadying me. We've faced worse. We need to understand what they want. As the shadows howled, I felt a surge of defiance rise within me. We're not afraid. We're not joining you. With a final push, we intensified the pulse, flooding the area with brilliant light that sent the shadows spiraling back. The whispers transformed into shrieks, echoing in the air, and then silence. The sudden calm felt surreal. I could hardly believe we had held them off. We were still safe, for now, but I knew this was just a temporary reprieve. Everyone okay? I asked, glancing around at my team. They nodded, though their faces were still pale with fear. What just happened? Cassie asked, breathless. I think we sent them back for the moment, I replied, though uncertainty gnawed at me. But we need to prepare for their next move. They will come again, and next time, they may not be so easily deterred. As the reality of our situation sank in, I felt the weight of our task ahead. We had to unravel the mystery of Epsilon 12 before it consumed us entirely. The shadows may have retreated, but they were still out there, watching, waiting for the opportunity to strike. As the echoes of the pulse faded into the silence of the shuttle, a heavy weight settled upon us. The oppressive atmosphere outside felt momentarily lifted, but I knew the respite wouldn't last. The shadows were still out there, lurking, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim their hold. Let's run another analysis, I said, trying to break the tension that hung thick in the air. We need to see how effective the pulse was and if there are any changes in the energy readings now that the shadows are momentarily dispersed. Lee nodded, his expression serious as he returned to the control panel. I'll pull up the latest data, he said, fingers flying across the screen. Let's see if we can get any insights on their behavior. Cassie leaned in, her eyes scanning the readings as they updated. I'm still trying to process what we experienced, she admitted, her voice wavering. Those figures, there was something almost sentient about them. They seemed to respond to the pulse, Dr. Oliver added, his brow furrowed in thought. It's as if they're not just mindless entities. They might be aware of us and our intentions. I glanced at him, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. If that's the case, we need to tread carefully. They're not just shadows. There's something more complex. Look at this, Lee said, interrupting my thoughts. His eyes were wide with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The energy readings are still fluctuating, even after the pulse. It's almost like they're regrouping or preparing for another encounter. That's not good, Cassie said, biting her lip. What if they come back stronger? We barely managed to hold them off. We need to come up with a strategy, I said, feeling a surge of determination. If we're going to figure out what they want, we need to understand their patterns. Let's analyze the data from our previous encounters and see if we can predict their behavior. As we delved into the readings, I felt a growing sense of urgency. The shadows outside might be regrouping, but we had a chance to uncover the truth about this place and the entities that inhabited it. I had to push aside the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. The safety of my team depended on it. Hours passed as we sifted through the data, our minds racing to connect the dots. Lee led the analysis, correlating the energy spikes with our pulse activations, while Dr. Oliver focused on the symbols we had encountered, searching for meaning in their chaotic designs. Cassie and I compiled notes, documenting every detail in hopes of unveiling a deeper understanding. Then, as if sensing our focus, the ground beneath us trembled again, sending vibrations through the shuttle. The alarm on the control panel blared to life, startling us from our work. Not again, Cassie gasped, eyes wide with fear. What's happening? External readings are spiking, Lee shouted, his fingers flying over the controls. They're approaching fast. I felt my heart drop as I turned to the viewport. The darkness outside began to swirl and coalesce, shadows twisting together like a living storm. The whispers returned, a cacophony that filled the air with a haunting melody. Asterisk, asterisk, join us. No, I shouted, panic surging through me. We can't let them in. Activate the pulse, Lee yelled, scrambling to reach the generator. We need to push them back. I rushed to the control panel, my hands shaking as I prepared to initiate the pulse again. On my count, I shouted. 3, 2, 1, now. The generator hummed to life, and a brilliant light surged forth, illuminating the shadows that pressed against the shuttle. The whispers turned into frantic screams, the dark figures recoiling as the light pushed against them. Keep it steady, Dr. Oliver urged, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. We need to maintain the pulse. As the light flooded the area, I could see the shadows more clearly, their forms twisted in agony, flickering like dying flames, but they were not deterred. They swarmed closer, the whispers escalating into a deafening roar. Don't let them break through, Cassie shouted, fear evident in her voice. I won't, I shouted back, trying to reinforce the barrier with every ounce of concentration I had. The shadows surged against the pulse, and I could feel the pressure building, threatening to overwhelm us. Then, in an instant, the figure stopped. The whispers faded into a hushed silence, and the shadows began to retreat. Swirling away from the light, their shapes dissipating like smoke in the wind. "Is it working?" Cassie asked, eyes wide with disbelief. I think so," Lee replied, staring at the screen in astonishment. "The readings are stabilizing." But just as I began to feel a glimmer of hope, the shadows coalesced into a single massive figure, dark and imposing, towering above the shuttle. A cold wave of dread washed over me as it extended a shadowy arm toward us, and the whispers transformed into a single, commanding voice. Asterisk, asterisk, you cannot escape. You will join us. The sheer power of the words crashed over us like a tidal wave, and I felt the pulse of fear rise in my throat. This was not just an entity, it was a force of will that demanded compliance. "No!" I screamed, adrenaline surging through me. "We will not join you." With a final push, I intensified the pulse, pouring everything I had into the generator. The light surged, pushing against the darkness with a ferocity that resonated deep within me. The shadow figure roared, a sound that echoed through the very core of the shuttle, shaking the metal and rattling our resolve. But as the light intensified, the figure flickered, the shadows warping and distorting under the pressure. "Keep it steady," Dr. Oliver urged, determination etched on his face. The light enveloped the entity, and for a brief moment, I saw flashes of faces within the shadow's lost souls, trapped in darkness, their eyes pleading for freedom. "Asterisk, asterisk, join us," they cried again, their voices rising in a desperate chorus. "No," I shouted, tears stinging my eyes as I fought against the overwhelming pull of the shadows. "We are not yours." With one final surge, the light exploded outward, the shadows recoiling and dissipating in a brilliant flash. The roar of the entity faded into silence, and the pressure in the air lifted, leaving us breathless and trembling. We collapsed against the interior of the shuttle, gasping for breath as the reality of our survival sank in. We had held them off this time. "What was that?" Cassie whispered, her voice shaking. "What did we just face?" "I don't know," I admitted, my heart still racing. "But we have to figure it out. Whatever those entities are, they're not done with us yet. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of the darkness that lies beneath Epsilon 12. As I looked at my team, I felt a mixture of fear and resolve. We would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The shadows might have retreated, but they were still out there, lurking, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. The oppressive silence in the shuttle began to transform into a chaotic mix of fear and determination as we gathered ourselves after our latest encounter. We had survived the shadow figures, but the reality of our situation weighed heavily on us. I could still feel the echo of their whispers pressing against my mind, urging me to join them, to succumb to the darkness that surrounded us. "Let's recap what we know," I suggested, trying to regain control of the moment. The hum of the shuttle systems provided a backdrop as I focused on my team. "We have encountered something here, something ancient and powerful. We need to understand its nature if we're going to find a way to escape." Cassie nodded, her expression still pale but resolute. "The symbols, they must mean something. If they're a form of communication, we need to decipher them." "Agreed," Dr. Oliver said, adjusting his glasses, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We need to analyze them against the energy readings we've gathered. There has to be a link." Lee pulled up the data on his console, the screen flickering to life with the chaotic symbols we had collected. "I'll start cross-referencing the readings with what we have on the entities. If we can find a pattern, it might give us some insight into their behavior." I watched as he worked, the tension in the air thickening with each passing second. The shadows might have retreated for now, but their presence lingered like a dark cloud. I felt the urge to check the viewport to see if they were still out there, but I forced myself to focus on the task at hand. "While you work on that, I'll see if there's any information from previous missions that might relate to our findings," I said, feeling the urgency of our situation pressing down on me. Hours passed as we pored over the data, each of us lost in our respective tasks. I felt a sense of camaraderie building between us, a bond forged in the fires of fear and determination. But as I sifted through the historical records, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were racing against time. Then, as if sensing our focus, the ground trembled again, a warning rumble that sent adrenaline surging through my veins. The alarms on the control panel blared to life, and my heart dropped. "Status report," I shouted, turning toward Lee. "External readings are fluctuating. The electromagnetic field is spiking again," he shouted back, panic creeping into his voice. "Are the shadows back?" Cassie asked, fear evident in her eyes. "I don't know," Lee replied, frantically adjusting the controls. trying to access the external cameras. I rushed to the viewport, peering into the darkness outside. My heart raced as I scanned the landscape, feeling the shadows closing in again, their presence palpable. "They're coming!" I shouted, panic rising in my throat. "Activate the pulse generator," Dr. Oliver ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. I moved quickly, my hands trembling as I prepared the device. "Get ready!" I yelled, adrenaline coursing through me. "On my count." Lee nodded, his eyes focused on the readings as they surged. 3, 2, 1, now. I hit the switch, and the pulse erupted into the darkness, flooding the area with blinding light. The shadows writhed and twisted, recoiling from the surge, but I could feel their anger building. "Hold your ground," I urged, the pressure mounting as the figures pressed against the light, the whispers rising into a frantic crescendo. The shadows began to coalesce again, a massive shape forming in the darkness, dark and imposing. I could feel its presence even from within the shuttle, a cold dread creeping into my bones. "No! We're not joining you," I shouted defiantly. The figure extended an arm toward us, and the shadows surged closer, threatening to engulf the shuttle. Asterisk, asterisk, you cannot escape. Join us!" The voice roared, a powerful resonance that shook the very walls of the shuttle. "Fight it," Cassie cried, gripping my arm tightly. "We can't give in." With determination burning in my chest, I focused on the pulse generator, pouring every ounce of energy into it. "We will not join you," I shouted again, my voice ringing with conviction. The light intensified, and for a moment, I thought I saw the shadows falter, flickering in response to our defiance. "Now, increase the output," I urged Lee, who nodded and adjusted the controls. As the pulse surged outward, the massive shadow figure shrieked, the sound echoing through the air, blending with the whispers into a chaotic symphony of despair. The shadows twisted and recoiled, but I could see the darkness swirling, a storm ready to unleash its fury. "Hold it steady," Dr. Oliver shouted, his voice resolute despite the chaos. "We have to maintain the barrier." I could feel the pressure building, the darkness pushing against us with a ferocity I had never experienced before. But we stood firm, a united front against the encroaching shadows. Asterisk, asterisk, join us. The voice echoed once more, a haunting plea that tugged at my very core. "Never!" I roared, my heart pounding in my chest. "We are not yours to take." With one final surge, I activated the emergency override, flooding the area with light so intense that it pierced the darkness. The shadow figure howled in agony, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw it flicker, the darkness momentarily unraveling. And then, with a final, deafening roar, the shadows shattered, dissipating into the cold air as the pulse of light pushed them away. We were left gasping in the aftermath, the oppressive weight of the darkness lifting as the shuttle fell silent. "Is it over?" Cassie asked, her voice shaking. "I think so," I replied, though uncertainty gnawed at me. The shadows had retreated, but I knew they were not truly gone. But we need to regroup and analyze what just happened. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning. As we caught our breath, the reality of our situation settled heavily on us. The darkness would return, and we would need to be ready. The true horror of Epsilon 12 was far from over, and I felt a renewed sense of determination. We would face whatever lay ahead together, and we would uncover the truth, no matter the cost.